Berserk is often hailed as one of the greatest manga and anime of all time. Yet, beneath the hype lies a deeply problematic, bloated, and fundamentally broken work that fails on nearly every level. From its treatment of female characters to its narrative incompetence, Berserk represents decades of wasted potential and troubling creative choices that the community refuses to honestly acknowledge. Kentaro Miura launched Berserk in 1989 and spent over 30 years producing what would become an infamously incomplete story. His notoriously slow release schedule, often going months or years between chapters, meant that even before his death in May 2021, readers were subject to an agonizing crawl toward a resolution that never came. When Miura died at the age of 54, he left behind 364 chapters of unresolved plot threads and abandoned character arcs. His friend, Koji Mori, and Studio Gaga took over in 2022. But rather than improving the situation, the continuation has been catastrophic. The art quality has noticeably declined, character development has regressed, and storylines have been abandoned entirely. It feels less like honoring Miura's vision and more like a cash grab, exploiting a dead man's work. Berserk's treatment of women is nothing short of atrocious. Every single female character exists primarily as a target of sexual violence or as an object of obsession for male characters. They are consistently written as weaker and less intelligent than their male counterparts, serving as little more than glorified plot devices. Casca's arc is the most egregious example. After being introduced as a capable warrior, she's brutally assaulted during the eclipse and then essentially deleted from the story for approximately 20 volumes. Reduced to a mindless shell that exists only to be protected and dragged along, this isn't bold storytelling about trauma. It's lazy writing that removes a character's agency because the author couldn't be bothered to explore the psychological complexity he himself introduced. Even when Miura later admitted he regretted overdoing the sexual assault content and acknowledged his inexperience, the damage was done. But regret doesn't excuse hundreds of chapters of exploitative content. If you're not equipped to handle sensitive subject matter responsibly, don't include it. The fact that even 13-year-old characters like Shioreke aren't spared from sexualization reveals how deeply rooted these problems are. The pattern is consistent and disgusting. Female characters exist to be assaulted, sexualized, and sidelined. It's telling that assault scenes are exclusively male on female, suggesting less of an attempt to portray realistic human depravity and more the author's personal fixation. When composer Sasumi Hirasawa is quoted describing Guts' sword as representing male autonomy, destroying female autonomy, it's not poetry, it's a damning admission of what this series actually is. Initially, Berserk's graphic violence seems purposeful, establishing the brutal medieval setting and the cruelty of its world. This impact lasts approximately 3 volumes before devolving into repetitive, desensitizing shock value that serves no narrative purpose. The Wildland chapters are completely unnecessary. We'd already been introduced to apostles and their nature. Having another appear right before the eclipse as clumsy foreshadowing actually lessens the impact of what follows. The troll sequences, the endless parade of happy demons. It's the same note played over and over until it becomes white noise. The action scenes follow an identical tiresome formula. Guts overcomes an overpowering enemy, gets horrifically injured in ways that should be permanently crippling or fatal, then somehow bounces back to perfect health for the next encounter. His comically oversized sword is so absurdly impractical that every fight scene becomes unintentionally hilarious rather than epic. The rule of cool can only carry you so far before physics and logic demand acknowledgement. Guts is barely more than a walking trope. The strong silent type who unwillingly attracts followers. While his backstory provides some initial interest, he experiences virtually no meaningful character development across the hundreds of chapters. He has the same motivations, the same personality, and the same approach to problems in chapter 300 as he did in chapter 90. He's less a character and more a punching bag for the author to torture. Things happen to Guts constantly, but he rarely makes meaningful choices that demonstrates growth or change. He swings his ridiculous sword, he suffers, he broods, repeat, ad infinitum. For a protagonist carrying an epic narrative, he's remarkably static and dull. Griffith might be one of the most overrated antagonists in manga history. He commits atrocities throughout the series, yet his motivation boils down to, quote, wants his own kingdom. But why? What drives this ambition? Miura never bothers to provide substantial psychological depth for a character positioned as the primary villain of a decades-long epic. This shallow characterization is inexcusable. He's not complex or morally ambiguous, he's simply underdeveloped. His design is off-putting, his actions lack compelling motivation, and his role in the narrative feels more like an excuse to torture Guts than the result of genuine character-driven conflict. After the Golden Age arc, which some consider the only truly good portion of the manga, Berserk falls apart structurally. The pacing becomes glacial, and Guts collects a generic RPG party of followers, a trope borrowed directly from Journey to the West and executed with zero innovation. Miura admitted that he wrote without a complete plan, making it up as he went along. This shows. The series is bloated beyond belief, stuffed with filler, repetitive encounters, and meandering subplots that go nowhere. Hundreds of chapters could be cut without losing anything of value. The manga attempts to tackle weighty themes: causality, existentialism, moral ambiguity, divine caprice, but lacks the narrative discipline to handle them coherently. It's not profound complexity, it's unfocused mess masquerading as depth. The sheer length becomes Sisyphean, exhausting rather than epic, a slog that collapses under its own pretensions. Beyond the main cast, supporting characters are paper thin. Most exist as one-dimensional archetypes: the comic relief, the obsessive follower, the psychopath. Few demonstrate genuine agency or motivation independent of the protagonist. Characters routinely commit mass slaughter, responsible for hundreds or thousands of deaths, yet face zero consequences and undergo sudden personality shifts with no explanation. The series lacks any consistent moral or ethical framework, creating not compelling ambiguity, but narrative incoherence. When anything can happen without consequence, nothing matters. If the original series was problematic, the continuation after Miura's death has been catastrophic. Character development that barely existed has now completely regressed. The art quality has visibly declined. Plot threads are abandoned without explanation, as if characters simply cease to exist when convenient. The story feels rudderless, as though the new team is making arbitrary decisions with no regard for consistency or resolution. Whether this represents Miura's actual notes or the team's interpretation is unclear, but the result is the same. A bad series became worse. Berserk's anime adaptations deserve special mention for being consistently terrible. The 1997 anime, while having decent animation for its time, ended abruptly with the eclipse and provided zero resolution. It's an incomplete adaptation of an incomplete story. The 2016 to 2017 anime series is widely regarded as one of the worst anime adaptations ever produced. The CGI animation is jarringly poor, with stiff character models, choppy frame rates, and ugly visual direction that drains any potential atmosphere from the source material. Important story elements are cut or rushed. The pacing is disastrous, and the sound design includes bizarre metallic clanging that has become a meme for how bad it is. Even fans of the manga largely agreed these adaptations are unwatchable disasters that fail to capture anything worthwhile about the source materials, which itself is already deeply flawed. Berserk borrows heavily from other sources: H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror, the aesthetic of 300, elements from Pirates of the Caribbean and Star Wars, but executes these influences poorly. Rather than synthesizing inspiration into something original, it feels like a grab bag of stolen ideas without cohesive vision. Some fans point out the detailed artwork in certain panels, particularly during the mythological sequences. The Golden Age arc maintains some narrative coherence compared to the rest. The dark fantasy setting has aesthetic appeal, but these minor elements don't justify the decades of problematic content, narrative failure, and exploitative creative choices. A few well-drawn panels and one decent story arc don't redeem hundreds of chapters of bloated, repetitive, gratuitous content that fails on fundamental storytelling levels. The manga community treats Berserk as sacred and Miura as infallible. This does a massive disservice to readers, particularly younger audiences encountering the series. Critical discussion is shut down by fans who can't acknowledge the serious problems with their favorite series. When a work is this fundamentally flawed in its treatment of women, its narrative construction, its thematic incoherence, and its exploitative content, pretending otherwise isn't appreciation, it's delusion. Berserk is a catastrophic failure that's been elevated to masterpiece status through fandom groupthink. It's a bloated, directionless mess filled with gratuitous violence and sexual assault that serves the author's apparent fetishes rather than any coherent narrative purpose. The protagonist is static, the antagonist is shallow, female characters are tools for exploitation, and the story goes nowhere across hundreds of chapters. The work remains unfinished at the author's death and has only gotten worse under new management. The anime adaptations are universally terrible, with the 2016 series ranking among the worst ever produced. Berserk had potential in its opening chapters, but that potential was systematically squandered through poor creative choices, lack of planning, and deeply problematic content that the author himself later regretted. It's represented a colossal waste of time for readers who will never see resolution to a story that wasn't worth following in the first place. I don't recommend this series to anyone, for anyone. It's an overrated disaster that deserves honest criticism, not the mindless praises it receives from a fan base unwilling to acknowledge what they're actually defending. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree, and don't forget to like and subscribe.